Have you ever tried to relax but your thoughts kept racing as if your mind refused to sit down? And have you ever wondered why the more you chase peace, the farther it seems to run? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight we are going to explore a phrase that sounds mysterious until you live it for yourself. No mind. Some people misunderstand it and think it means becoming blank, emotionless, or like a machine. But the Buddhist and Zen meaning is much kinder and more practical. No mind is not the destruction of thought. It is freedom from being dragged around by thought. It is the ability to let the mind rest without falling asleep inside your own life. To make this real, I want to tell you a set of stories that flow into each other like a quiet river. Each story points to the same core lesson. When the mind stops clinging, life becomes lighter. When the mind stops resisting, the heart becomes steadier. And when the heart becomes steady, karma shifts. Because karma is not only what you do with your hands. Karma is also what you repeat in your mind. The first story begins with a person named Jonah. Jonah is not a monk. Jonah is not looking for spiritual identity. Jonah just wants relief. Jonah is the kind of person who looks fine from the outside. He answers messages fast. He meets deadlines. He shows up to events. He smiles in photos. People say he is reliable. But inside, Jonah is tired in a way sleep cannot fix. His body is tired, but his mind is even more tired. Every moment feels like a small emergency. If one email arrives, 10 thoughts arrive with it. If one plan changes, his mind produces 1,000 future disasters. If one person seems distant, his mind writes an entire novel about rejection. At night, Jonah lies in bed and the mind becomes louder. The day ends, and suddenly the mind starts doing its secret job. It replays conversations. It edits his mistakes. It imagines arguments. It compares him to others. It makes lists. It makes warnings. It makes threats. He tries to force it to stop, and it refuses. He thinks the problem is that his life is too busy. But even on weekends, the mind stays busy. One evening, Jonah visits a small bookstore to escape his screens. He walks through shelves without a plan. He picks up a thin book with a simple cover. The book is about Zen. And on one page he sees a phrase that makes him pause. When the mind chases, suffering grows. When the mind rests, wisdom appears. Jonah does not fully understand it, but he feels something in his chest loosen. He buys the book, goes home, and reads it slowly. The book talks about no mind, but it explains it in a way that feels surprisingly ordinary. No mind is the mind that is not stuck. No mind is the mind that can respond without being trapped in endless commentary. Jonah decides to try a small experiment. Not a huge spiritual leap, just a quiet practice. He sets a timer for 10 minutes. He sits in a chair. He closes his eyes. He notices the breath. Within seconds, thoughts attack him. He thinks this is pointless. He thinks I am doing it wrong. He thinks I should check my phone. He thinks about tomorrow. He thinks about yesterday. He thinks about everything. He opens his eyes and says out loud, "I cannot do this." Then he remembers a sentence from the book. You do not create no mind by fighting the mind. You discover no mind by seeing the mind. So he tries again. This time, when thoughts come, he does not treat them like enemies. He treats them like weather. A thought appears, and he silently says, "Thinking." Then he returns to the breath. Another thought appears, and he says, "Thinking." Then he returns. At first it feels repetitive and boring. But after a few days, something subtle changes. Jonah notices that his thoughts are not one thing. Some thoughts are urgent. Some are random. Some are old pain. Some are fear disguised as planning. Some are pride disguised as ambition. He begins to see that he has been obeying the mind as if every thought is a command. The moment he sees that, a new space opens. It is tiny at first, a fraction of a second. But that fraction is everything. Because in that fraction, he can choose. He can choose to breathe instead of react. He can choose to pause instead of argue. He can choose to listen instead of defend. He can choose to let a thought pass instead of building a whole story around it. This is the doorway to no mind, not blankness. Now the second story begins. Because Jonah is not the only person learning this. There is a woman named Celine who works with Jonah. She is calm in a way that annoys him at first. Not because she is arrogant, but because her calmness makes Jonah feel his own noise. When a crisis happens at work, Jonah panics. Celine stays steady. When someone criticizes her, Jonah expects her to explode or collapse. Celine simply nods, asks a clarifying question, and responds with calm facts. One day Jonah finally asks her, "How are you like this?" Celine smiles and says, "I used to be worse than you." Jonah does not believe it. Celine tells him that years ago she had constant anxiety. She would rehearse conversations before having them. She would replay them after. She would predict every possible disaster. She would overwork to feel safe. But she discovered something that changed her. She discovered that the mind can be a loyal servant and a terrible master. Jonah asks, "How did you make it a servant?" Celine says, "I stopped feeding it all day. I stopped giving it sugar and then blaming it for shaking at night." Jonah looks confused. Celine explains in plain language. She says the mind gets trained by what you practice. If you practice constant stimulation, constant comparison, constant speed, the mind becomes addicted to movement. Then, when you try to rest, the mind panics. It does not know how to be still. So she changed her training. She began to build small islands of no mind throughout the day. Not mystical. Simple. When she walked without narrating. She felt her feet. She listened to sound. She noticed colors. When she ate without scrolling. When she waited in line, she did not escape into her phone. She stayed. She felt boredom. She let boredom pass. At first it was uncomfortable. Then it became healing. She realized boredom was not a threat. Boredom was a gate. When you walk through boredom without escaping, you find presence. And presence is where no mind lies. Jonah tries this the next day. It is harder than he expects. His hands reach for his phone automatically. His mind tries to fill every gap with noise. But he remembers Celine saying that the mind is trained by repetition. So he repeats a new pattern. When the urge to scroll appears, he pauses. He takes one breath. He feels his body. He returns to the moment. This does not make him perfect, but it makes him awake. Now the third story begins. Because no mind becomes real when life tests it. Jonah has a difficult relationship with his father. His father is not an evil person. He is simply untrained. He speaks harshly when he feels insecure. He gives advice that feels like criticism. He avoids vulnerability by joking or by judging. One weekend Jonah visits home. At dinner his father makes a comment that always triggers him. It is a small sentence, but it hits Jonah like an old bruise. His father says, "You are too sensitive. You always overthink." In the past, Jonah would explode or shut down. He would argue, trying to prove his feelings are valid. Or he would swallow it and then replay it all night. Either way, suffering. This time, Jonah feels the heat rise. He feels the tightness in his chest. He feels the mind rushing to build a defense speech. Then he remembers the practice. Thinking. He takes one breath. He does not force calm. He simply does not obey the first impulse. He looks at his father and says quietly, "Maybe I do overthink, but I am trying to learn how to rest my mind." His father laughs, confused. He says, "What does that even mean?" Jonah could argue. He could lecture. He could try to turn dinner into a debate about emotional intelligence. But he sees something else. He sees his father fear. The fear of feelings. The fear of being wrong. The fear of not knowing how to love softly. Jonah does something different. He asks his father a gentle question. "Dad, Were you ever allowed to rest when you were young? His father goes quiet. The room changes. For a moment, the old pattern pauses. His father looks away and says, "No." Rest was laziness. Feelings were weakness. Jonah feels compassion rise. Not pity, not superiority, just compassion. He realizes his father's harshness is not strength. It is a scar. In that moment, Jonah experiences no mind in a new way. No mind is not just inner quiet. No mind is the freedom to see clearly without adding hatred. No mind is the ability to feel pain without turning it into war. They finish dinner without drama. Later, Jonah lies in bed and notices something shocking. His mind is quieter. Not silent, but softer. The mind did not spend the whole night replaying. Because the mind did not get fed with conflict. Jonah did not pour fuel into the old fire. That is karma changing in real time. He planted a different cause, and the effect was a calmer night. Now let us go deeper, because no mind is often described as a state, but it is also a path. In Buddhist teachings, suffering grows from clinging to being right, clinging to being admired, clinging to control, clinging to a fixed identity. When you cling, the mind becomes tight. Tight mind becomes reactive. Reactive mind creates harsh speech and unskillful action. Those actions create consequences. Consequences create more fear. The cycle continues. No mind interrupts the cycle by loosening clinging. It is the mind that can hold a thought without gripping it. It is the mind that can feel an emotion without becoming it. It is the mind that can see a story without living inside it. This is why no mind is deeply connected to wisdom. Wisdom is not having more opinions. Wisdom is seeing what is actually happening. And what is actually happening is often simple. A sensation, a thought, a craving, a fear, a habit. When you see these clearly, you stop being hypnotized by them. Now the fourth story begins in a different place. A small mountain temple with a young novice named Ren. Ren is eager. Ren wants awakening. Ren wants to become and wise quickly. He reads many teachings and collects many phrases. He can explain emptiness. He can explain impermanence. He can explain compassion. But his mind is still loud. One day Ren goes to his teacher and says, "I understand the teachings, but my mind will not stop." The teacher looks at Ren and says, "Good." Ren is shocked. He expected correction. He expected a technique. He expected secret advice. Instead, he gets one word. "Good." Ren asks, "Why good?" The teacher says, "Because now you can see the problem." Many people do not even know they are drowning. They think drowning is normal. Ren says, "So how do I get no mind?" The teacher stands up and points to a broom. He says, "Sweep the courtyard." Ren feels insulted. He thinks, "I came for enlightenment and you gave me chores." But he sweeps. At first he sweeps with anger. Then he sweeps with boredom. Then he sweeps with rushing. Then, after some time, he sweeps with attention. He feels the movement of the arms. He hears the sound of bristles. He watches dust gather and disappear. He notices sunlight on stone. He notices breath. For a few moments, Ren forgets his story about himself. He is not trying to be special. He is not trying to achieve. He is simply sweeping. The teacher watches and says softly, "That is no mind." Ren stops and says, "But I was still thinking sometimes." The teacher says, "No mind does not mean no thoughts. It means no bondage." Ren asks, "What is bondage?" The teacher says, "When a thought arrives and you ride it like a horse into suffering. When anger arrives and you wear it like a crown. When fear arrives and you build your whole life around it. That is bondage." The teacher points again to the broom. He says, "Sweep again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next." Ren realizes the teacher is not punishing him. The teacher is training him. The teacher is giving him a direct path into no mind through ordinary action. because ordinary action is where most karma is made. Ren practices sweeping with attention every day. Over weeks, something changes. His mind begins to trust stillness. His mind begins to settle. His speech becomes gentler. His reactions become slower. He begins to notice the moment before he speaks from ego. And he chooses silence instead. This is the strength of no mind. No mind does not make you passive. It makes you skillful. Now the fifth story returns to Jonah, because Jonah begins to use no mind as a medicine for modern life. Jonah notices that many people around him are suffering from the same illness. Not physical illness, attention illness. They cannot be present. They cannot listen without planning a reply. They cannot rest without guilt. They cannot be alone without distraction. Their minds are always hungry, and that hunger makes them irritable. Jonah does not judge them. He recognizes himself in them. And this is where compassion enters naturally. When you see your own mind clearly, you stop feeling superior. You become humbler. You become kinder. You see that people are not bad. People are trained. So Jonah trains differently. When someone speaks to him, he practices listening as if listening is meditation. He listens without preparing the next sentence. He notices the urge to interrupt, and he does not feed it. He notices the urge to look smart, and he lets it pass. People begin to feel calmer around him. Not because Jonah became magical, but because presence is contagious. When you are not rushing, you give others permission to slow down too. This is also karma. Your inner state influences your outer world. Calm speech creates calmer relationships. Calmer relationships create safer environments. Safer environments reduce fear. Reduced fear makes compassion easier. Compassion makes wisdom easier. The cycle turns in a better direction. Jonah also begins to notice something else. When he rests his mind, he becomes braver. This might sound strange, but it is true. Many fears are kept alive by mental movies. The mind imagines humiliation. The mind imagines failure. The mind imagines loss. The mind imagines endless pain. Then the body reacts as if the movie is real. No mind cuts the projector. When Jonah has a difficult conversation, he no longer spends hours rehearsing. He prepares a little, then he rests. He shows up. He speaks honestly. He listens. He responds. He leaves. He does not replay it for days. This is freedom. Freedom is not controlling every outcome. Freedom is not being controlled by the inner cinema. Now, no mind has a reputation of being cold, but the true experience is the opposite. When you stop gripping your thoughts, you become more available to life. You notice small kindness. You notice beauty. You notice the pain of others more clearly. You become less self-obsessed, and that makes the heart warmer, not colder. No mind makes room for compassion. Imagine you are walking and you see someone drop something. In a noisy mind, you might keep walking, trapped in your own thought storm. In a rested mind, you notice. You help. Not as a hero, just as a human. Imagine someone speaks harshly to you. In a noisy mind, you might attack back or collapse. In a rested mind, you might see their suffering and still set a boundary. You might say, "I hear you, but do not speak to me that way." That is compassion with wisdom. Compassion without wisdom becomes self-betrayal. Wisdom without compassion becomes cruelty. No mind supports the balance because it reduces ego heat. Now let me share a moment that often creates the biggest shift for people. There is a difference between quiet mind and resting mind. Quiet mind is when thoughts slow down. Resting mind is when thoughts can come and go without disturbing you. Resting mind is stronger because it does not depend on perfect conditions. When you can rest the mind in noise, in stress, in uncertainty, you become unshakable. This is why no mind is often described as a sword and a shelter at the same time. It cuts delusion and it protects the heart. If you want a simple practice from tonight, Here is a gentle way to enter it without forcing anything. Sit for a few minutes and listen to whatever sound is already present. A fan, traffic, your own breath. Let sound be sound. When the mind comments, notice it and return. Do not argue. Do not chase. Then pick one ordinary activity tomorrow and do it with full attention. Washing hands, making tea, walking to the bus, brushing teeth, eating one bite. Do it without adding a story. Just do it. At first it will feel unfamiliar. That is how you know you are retraining the mind. Over time, you will notice the mind becoming less hungry for chaos. You will notice the heart becoming more stable. You will notice that your reactions soften. You will notice you can pause. And that pause is where your destiny changes. Because destiny is not only the big moments. Destiny is built from the small choices repeated 1,000 times. When you practice no mind, you practice freedom. When you practice freedom, you practice wisdom. When you practice wisdom, you naturally practice compassion. And when you practice compassion, karma transforms. Because you stop planting seeds of harm and you start planting seeds of healing. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this teaching on no mind touched something in you, share your experience in the comments. When does your mind feel most restless? And what helps you return? If you have a small daily practice that helps your mind rest, tell us. Because someone else might be searching for exactly that. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. Your support helps this calm, deep work reach more people who need it. Until next time, keep practicing, keep returning, and let your mind rest without fear.